Welcome, class. Grab a seat. In today's explainer on human evolutionary psychology, we're going to unpack a mystery that is incredibly universal yet deeply ingrained in all of us. Have you ever wondered why our highly evolved modern minds still completely break down under the weight of a simple shadow? Well, we're going to look at this through the lens of ancient survival to figure out exactly what goes down in your brain the second the lights go out. Okay, let's just do a really quick rundown of our syllabus today. We're covering apex predators trembling in shadows, fire and evolutionary survival, the neurobiology of the threat matrix, childhood imagination and nighttime anxiety, culture, nightmares, and modern denial, and we'll wrap it all up with the ancient shielded survivors. Alright, part 1. Apex predators trembling in shadows. Let's start by looking at this really strange behavioral anomaly that kicks in the exact moment our supposedly secure homes go dark. I want you to picture this. You lock the front door, you flip off the very last light, and you start walking down a pitch-empty hallway. Suddenly, the space around you is just swallowed up. So why does your heart give that sudden familiar little thump? Why do you catch yourself walking just a bit faster up those stairs? I mean, you know perfectly well the living room is empty, there are no monsters hiding under the rug, and yet your skin still prickles with this ancient, icy panic. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the massive clash happening right inside your head. On one hand, you're an apex predator living in a concrete fortress with modern security. That's your rational brain talking. But on the other hand, your evolutionary brain completely overrides all that logic, and in an instant, it reduces you to trembling prey. But here's the thing, this fear, it's not a malfunction at all. It's actually a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. Let's move to part 2. Fire and evolutionary survival. We need to travel way back to early human history to see why this physiological response was so crucial. Think about thousands of generations ago. Our ancestors didn't have deadbolts, right? No motion sensor floodlights. They slept under a literal canopy of stars out on the open savanna, and they relied entirely on fire to keep them safe. But fire always burns out eventually. And when those embers died, the savanna instantly became a playground for things equipped with night vision. So the reality is, you're sitting here today, surviving and thriving because your ancestors were absolutely terrified of what they couldn't see. The brave ones, the guys who confidently marched out into the pitch black to investigate a rustling bush, well, they simply didn't pass on their genes. Curiosity might have killed the cat, but it absolutely wiped out the early hominid. Physiologically speaking, we operate with a massive deficit in the dark. Our eyes are just incredibly poorly adapted for twilight. We completely lack something called the tapetum lucidum. That's that reflective layer that makes a cat's eyes glow in the dark. Because we don't have that, our retinas basically stumble in the dimness. First, we lose our color vision, and then our depth perception just plummets. And since the human brain absolutely abhors a sensory vacuum, the second it lacks visual data, it starts fabricating a reality out of its absolute worst assumptions. So you don't actually fear the dark itself, you fear the infinite probabilities of what it might be hiding. So what is exactly happening inside our brain's threat matrix when we hit that visual sensory vacuum? Let's dive into part 3, the neurobiology. There's a psychologist at Toronto Metropolitan University, Dr. Martin Anthony, who spent years looking into this. He found that fear of the dark is rarely about the mere absence of light. It's actually a hardwired, intense anxiety about the unpredictable. If you can't see, you can't prepare. And if you can't prepare, you don't survive, period. Your brain starts treating shadows like an active threat matrix. Is that a coat rack over there in the corner, or is it a killer? Well, your nervous system uses something called an error management bias. It's a survival strategy where it chooses to assume it's a killer every single time. Simply put, it's way better for your survival to mistake a shadow for a ghost than to mistake an actual threat for a shadow. Think about the last time you literally ran up the basement stairs. Maybe you felt like a phantom hand was reaching out for your ankle. You totally knew it was an illusion, but you ran anyway. Why? Well, Dr. Thalia Wheatley over at Dartmouth College explains that the human mind is basically a hyperactive pattern recognition machine. We are literally designed to see faces in the clouds and predators in the bushes. In the dark, this hyperactive agency detection goes into absolute overdrive. It amplifies the normal creaks of your floorboards, and suddenly the mundane hum of your refrigerator sounds like a low, menacing growl. Let's actually walk through this biological override sequence. First, the shadows dismantle your sense of time and space. As visual data drops, your boundaries blur and you lose your anchor to the physical room. Second, this sensory deprivation triggers a primal alarm in the amygdala, that small, almond-shaped center of your fear response. It does not care about your college degree or your modern skepticism. It just wants to keep your pulse going. Finally, the amygdala forcibly hijacks your prefrontal cortex. Your thinking, logical brain gets completely shoved into the passenger seat, and your ancient animal brain takes the wheel. Now, how does developmental psychology intersect with this ancient biology? Let's check out part 4, childhood imagination and nighttime anxiety. It is a known fact that fear of the dark notoriously spikes around age 2, and this isn't because toddlers were secretly watching scary movies or just showing weakness. This age coincides perfectly with the sudden, explosive development of their imaginative capacities. Almost overnight, children can conceptualize things that don't exist in the real world, and they begin projecting these internal anxieties right onto the empty corners of their bedrooms. But hey, don't fool yourself into thinking this is just some childish phase that we all gracefully outgrow. We love to tell ourselves that we're rational 21st century adults, but a study by Dr. Tommy Reineck shows a staggering number of adults still suffer from nighttime anxiety. We just hide it way better. We leave a hallway light on, we fall asleep to the comforting, glowing hum of a true crime documentary. When you think about it, we're really just trying to silence the whispering voice of our own biology. Which brings us to part 5, culture, nightmares, and modern denial. How exactly does our modern world interact with all this deep-seated biological whispering? The modern world has tried really hard to banish the night entirely. We build this artificial insulation, cities that never sleep, wrapped in this permanent comfort and glow of neon and sodium vapor. We tried so hard to turn the dark from a natural cycle into just a minor artificial inconvenience. But what happens when the power grid fails? When a blackout hits a major city, that biological reality sets in immediately. The collective anxiety becomes totally palpable. The silence gets heavy, and familiar streets suddenly look totally foreign and hostile. Despite all our glass and steel, that ancient fear is perfectly intact, waiting just beneath the surface. Notice how human culture creates this permanent feedback loop with our evolutionary programming. For millennia, our stories have associated light with truth, purity, and safety, while we associate the dark with deceit, corruption, and death. Your biology provides the vulnerability, and our culture happily provides the monsters to fill the void. Think about your own nightmares for a second. They rarely take place on a sunny beach at noon, right? They unfold in abandoned hallways, foggy forests, and forgotten basements. When you stare into the dark, you are really just looking into the mirror of your own evolutionary vulnerability. Let's tie the whole shebang together in our final section, the ancient shield of survivors. I want us to completely reframe how we view our reactions to the shadows. If you take away just one thing from today's explainer, make it this. Tonight, when you flip that final switch and your eyes start straining against the sudden blackness, do not beat yourself up for that sudden adrenaline surge. Seriously, do not view your racing heart as a weakness or some silly childish remnant. It is the voice of literally a million survivors whispering through your bloodline. It is the ancient shield that kept your ancestors alive long enough to build the very world you are standing in right now. You check the shadows because you are programmed to endure. You quicken your pace because your DNA remembers the wolves. You lock the front door, you turn off the final light, and you run from the empty hallway because, deep down in your brilliant, highly evolved evolutionary programming, you know one profound truth: the dark is never truly empty. So the next time you reach for that light switch, ask yourself, are you really afraid of the dark? Or are you just listening to the millions of survivors echoing in your DNA? Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Class dismissed.